Alright, one more offsuit Broadway hand. And we should be able to go a bit faster this time. So Queen Jack offsuit, it checks, it gets 1.17. So that gives us 58.5% equity. Queen Jack offsuit, it makes more straights than King 10, and it has less King high. So basically what that means is it's quite a bit more playable. Last time we gave King 10 offsuit 5% checking back. Queen Jack offsuit is quite a bit more playable. So we're going to give it 7.5%, which ends up being 61%. Yep. So 0.22. As an all-in, it's still a fold if shoved on. And when it checks down, it gets 3.07. So here it says 57% equity. And I'm going to do the same thing before where I end up taking 5% off just because it's less playable in the ISO'd pot compared to the checked back pot. Although I do tend to think Queen Jack offsuit is a bit better than King 10 in an ISO'd pot because people put you on King X a lot in ISO'd pots, but they're somewhat less likely to put you on a queen, and they tend to perceive a queen as actually being strong for their range, and so they might be more likely to play back a little bit. So I'm actually going to, instead of taking off 5%, I'll just take off 3.75%. So this gives us 55.75% capture factor. So here we go, 0.27. And shoving is definitely not going to be on the cards. It's actually a little bit closer than I expected, but it's looks like ISOing not all in is best, and folding. Alright, Queen Jack offsuit, Jack 10 offsuit are probably going to be basically in the same boat. I'd expect them to be probably about indifferent between checking and raising not all in. For now, I'll leave them as not all in raises. Alright, I'm going to try to fill up this offsuit section for now. I expect against this kind of player where you're seeing a lot of post-flop play, and you're not getting shoved on as much or folded as much, I expect a lot of these hands will be pretty close between checking and raising. But I think they'll be mostly checkbacks. In general, I think when you're seeing a lot of post-flop play, it's better to raise suited and connected hands. And so if I had to guess, I'd say something like, might be end up raising, kind of a range like this, and checking back most of these offsuit unconnected hands. So that's my guess, but it's good to check to make sure. So let's just start off with 10-9 offsuit. It's pretty connected, so there's a decent chance it could be. It'll probably be pretty close between checking and raising not all in. So 10-9 offsuit, its raw equity is 55%, 50.5 I mean. It's connected, and it doesn't have much high card value, so it's going to gain a much bigger benefit to its capture factor compared to its equity than a hand like King 10 offsuit even. But on the other hand, it is not a much bigger because King 10 offsuit was a strong hand, whereas 10-9 offsuit isn't. It's more of a middling hand. I'm going to put it at 7.5%, which is going to be 0.06. Actually, I'm going to give it 8.75. I tend to do it in increments of around 1.25%. It's not. There's no good reason, but that's how I did it. I think there's some. I think it like makes the arithmetic work a little bit nicer, but obviously you can put in whatever you can use. Like there's no difference between using 8.75 and using 9. All right, now for isognormal. I'm just going to fill out shove while I'm here because it's really fast. Negative 0.05. If you can't tell, the card residency view will show the EV compared to open folding. And since I'm measuring EV from start of the hand, I just have to subtract 1 from all of these numbers to get the EV from start of hand. Alright, now for isognormal. 10-9 offsuit, 2.55. So it actually did lose a little bit of equity, it looks like. Yep, so it went from 50.5 to, what was it, 48%, I think? Yeah, no, 47. So this time it has the benefit, it is against a more playable range, but your opponent isn't putting you on the kind of hand you have. When you get isognormal, you never think, oh, I bet their range has a lot of 10s and 9s in it. And you're correct to think that. So, but their range is more playable. So I'm still going to include a small loss, but not, like King 10 offsuit lost 5%. In this case, it lost 1.25. So I think it's being pretty fair. 49.5. So we just fill that in here. Oops. There we go. So 0. So now we're actually getting to larger differences. Which is good. It means we can. Means we're actually getting to a point where we can make money by making the correct decision. It is hard to, because these are approximations, like if I gave an extra 1.25%, so 51% here, then all of a sudden it's much closer. An extra 1.25% capture factor, which you definitely could, just based on the weight of them not expecting you to have it in their range. But you just do the best you can, and I think it's I think it ends up being a lot better than just doing what you feel like, even if it's not going to be 100% accurate. So I just filled it out like this. I left these hands because, in my experience, these are the best bluffing hands. So I'm going to do those, and if those look about indifferent, which I expect they will be somewhat close to, then basically if any of these hands are checks, then all of these will be, I expect. So let's try a typical bluff. So it's 0.71, it's got 35.5% equity. So it is connected, and it has no high card value. And what that means is it doesn't make none of its equity comes from having 5 high at the end of the hand, or at least almost none of its equity. Whereas with King 10 offsuit, a large part of its equity came from having King high. And as I mentioned before, if a lot of your equity comes from a high card, then that's a big loss to the. You lose a lot of that when you start playing post flop, and so you try to calculate a capture factor. On the other hand, when it does make a pair like a 5 or a 3, which is what a lot of its equity comes from, that is also a weak showdown value hand, although not as bad as King high, and so that does suffer a loss from playing post flop. So and obviously making 2 pairs and straights and trips are good, but I think because it's a weak hand and mostly it makes weak hands, it is going to lose a little bit from playing post flop. Actually, I think it'll be about even. Yeah, it's more of a... I mean, as you can probably tell from this, it's a lot of guesswork. So in this case, it was 30.5. But as long as I'm consistent and gives like similar capture factors to this, to checking back versus ISOing not all in, the results at least won't be too far off. Obviously, there's room for error, but as long as you're consistent, it's never going to be too bad, and it's always going to be a lot better than just using much cruder shortcuts, which I think a lot of people do. Like they'll use, when they try to decide if someone's limp folding too much, they'll just assume that they always lose when they're called, but that when they check back, they lose a big blind. And then they'll try to do the math for that to figure out if it's worth raising a bluff, but that's obviously going to be a lot less accurate than this kind of calculation. So here we get negative 0.39. And just to have a quick look at shoving, that's negative 0.62. So this kind of player we're not going to want to shove any bluffs against. Basically, if you're going to be mostly limping, you need to be playing 100% of hands this deep. Either that, or you can start min-raising more, assuming you're wanting to play balanced. Obviously, if someone's being very aggressive, then this could be a great way to play against them. Alright, now for ISOing not all in, we've got it gets 1.89. So it's 35% equity. So its equity barely drops at all. So you'll notice the bluffs and the value hands don't really lose any equity, whereas the middling hands like 10-9 offsuit do. That's one of the reasons why, in general, it's good to raise a polar range. You either raise, like hands you raise should either be for value or as a bluff most of the time. Alright, so we've got 35%. Last time it got 0. In this case, because I mentioned before that King 10 offsuit lost capture factor because in the ISO'd pot, the opponent played as if you had a strong hand, and in the checked pot, they played as if you had a weak hand. And so since King 10 offsuit was a strong hand, it lost value. It lost capture factor. ISOing not all in compared to checking back. In this case, it's the opposite. Since we have a weak hand, I think 5-3 offsuit benefits from ISOing not all in. And so instead of giving it, but again, the range is more playable. So I'd give first you go from 0, and I'm going to actually give it an extra 2.5% for ISOing not all in. It depends a lot on the opponent. If they're folding a lot to c-bets on the flop, then this could go even higher. So I'm actually going to make it 3.75%. So we've got 33.75. So it's 34%. So negative 0.5. So even though we gave it that bonus, it's actually still quite a clear check back. So to fill out the offsuit hands, first off, it's pretty safe to do this. So basically, when I'm thinking about raising not all in, I usually see raises as either a value bet or a bluff. And so with the offsuit hands, we can see that raising as a bluff is not going to be good because of how clear a check back 5-3 off was. And we can see that raising for value, at around like, basically it's okay with Broadway hands, but it doesn't look like it's going to be good with anything weaker than a Broadway hand. Since King 10 offsuit was about indifferent between raising and checking back, it's pretty reasonable to assume that King 9 offsuit is going to be a worse value raise than King 10 offsuit. So that it'll be a check back. So the only question is, there are reasons to want to raise high card hands as bluffs instead of something like 5-3 offsuit. So it could be worth it to try that as well, just to see if it ends up being a better bluff. But I'm going to wait until we're doing suited hands for that, because Suited hands against someone who's calling a lot, they are generally better not all in raises. Basically, a suited hand is always going to be a better not all in raise than its offsuit equivalent, as long as the opponent is calling quite a lot, which they are in this case. The main reason is just because you get to play in a bigger pot. So, for example, if you check back, you play in a 2 big blind pot 100% of the time, whereas if you raise, you get to play in a 5.4 big blind pot 61%. And so you're playing for 3.3 big blinds on average when you raise not all in, whereas when you check back, you're playing for 2 big blinds on average. So basically, improving a hand by going from offsuit to suited will always benefit raising not all in more than checking back against a player like this. So basically, if we try king deuce suited and that's a check back, then we're sure that king deuce off is. And if we do try the suited hands and it turns out that some of these suited hands are raising, then we might want to go back and look at king deuce offsuit. So this isn't permanent. Actually, these hands aren't permanent either. These hands are all going to be very close between raising and checking back. And so I'm actually going to leave them blank for now. And basically, with hands where it's very close, I think instead of deciding just by saying, oh, well, checking back was 0.01 big blinds better, or shoving was 0.02 big blinds better than checking, it's better to just look at how you want to play your overall range. So once we've got the obvious plays sorted out, like, oh, well, you should be checking back these hands and raising these hands, then once we see what that looks like, we can decide what to do with the less clear hands, based on whether we want to be raising more or checking more, stuff like that. I do think that in terms of pure, if in a vacuum, I think it's going to be a better check, because I do assume I have an edge on the opponents I play, and checking back is going to be a lot lower variance than shoving, and I think it's that makes it worth. I think that the benefit from being lower variance is a little bit more than the 0.02 big blinds, or yeah, it's more than the 0.02 big blinds gap between them. And obviously, this is well within the margin of error. I mean, there's a lot of room for variance in all of this. So we're gonna next, I guess we'll fill out the suited, the bulk of the suited hands. And then after that, I guess we can look at the pocket pairs, and then we can do the ace-x.